Hey everyone, my name is Jack. Welcome to the channel. I cover a variety of topics as they relate to personal finance, investing, and that sort of stuff, and generally try to help you get ahead financially. Now in this video, I want to go over a question that I've gotten a few times before, and that's how I got a full ride to law school and what that process looked like and how it's working out for me now. Because you'd be surprised at how achievable this goal is. It's not as though only a few people get this sort of thing or that you're unable to get it. You can take actionable steps to reach this same goal if you have a desire to go to law school and, more importantly, a desire to shave down your tuition costs. Like all of my other videos, I don't intend for this to be some sort of flex. I want to use my experiences to show you how you can potentially use them for your own benefit and so that you're well equipped if you're going into or maybe are considering applying for law school. Now, when you apply for law school, you need a couple things ready to go. One of those things is your GPA. You do need to perform decently well during your undergrad years. Even if your course load's really tough, you're going to need to have a pretty decent GPA because law schools generally aren't going to consider people, or at least won't give them a lot of aid, if you don't have a pretty solid GPA. Another thing you'll need is your LSAT score. That's your law school admissions test score, which kind of is used as one of the main benchmarks for weighing you against your competition when applying to every law school in the nation. Another thing you're going to need are some letters of recommendation from ideally professors, maybe bosses at jobs that you worked at before, but you're going to need a few letters of recommendation that you can go to, at least 2 in almost every application that you're going to send, but preferably have some more so you have a selection. And the last thing you'll need is your personal statement. This is basically an essay where you can write about almost whatever you want and is your chance to shine and really put a personal stamp, it's in the name after all, personal statement, on your law school application. Now I'm going to go through each of those 4 elements one at a time and give you the tips to succeed so that you can actually end up getting a full ride, and I'll explain the details about negotiating and that sort of thing later on. Now the GPA I already kind of talked about. Basically with your GPA, you're going to need for it to be in really good shape. You can't have a bunch of F's on your record, though it's kind of hard to get F's, frankly, in undergrad courses nowadays. But if you've struggled in a bunch of courses, it's not going to really bode well when you're applying to law school, because typically law schools, if they're going to give people a lot of money, they're going to want people who have performed well in the past because they know that it's more likely that you'll perform well now. That said, if you have some bad grades maybe in your freshman or sophomore year of college and in your later years you turned it around and did really well and your GPA rose again, that could still save you. But if you were failing classes up until the end of your undergrad experience, then you may be struggling when it comes time to apply. A lot of schools will have minimum GPAs, or at least recommended GPAs, that you should be at or around when you're applying. If you're not at those GPAs, don't expect to get a lofty package because you're below average, and technically they want to give their large scholarships to people who are above average or really show some sort of very unique circumstance which you might not necessarily have. And that kind of brings me to an overarching theme, and that's that you should not be applying for reach schools and expecting to get large financial packages. You really need to excel in your application compared to the average person that applies to whatever school you want to go to. So if you're not well above Harvard average numbers, don't expect to get a big scholarship from Harvard, because you're frankly expendable in their view, because there are a bunch of other applicants like you or who are better than you that might be more deserving in their view when they're actually making their decision. So you can give yourself a lot more leverage by applying to schools where your GPA is above the average, not at the average, but above the average. And that goes for your LSAT score as well. If your LSAT score is a 150 and the school's average is a 150, then you're probably not going to get a full ride to that school. Because if they were giving full rides to everyone who was at the 150 average, they would not really have any revenue coming in as a school. Because remember, schools are in the business of making money too. For better or for worse, that is the model that a lot of schools have, especially private schools. They are there to bring in revenue and ideally make some sort of profit, or if they're non-for-profit, they still need to meet all of their expenses. It's a business. So you really do have to try and earn the scholarship, because if they can't give full rides to everyone, because then they'd be operating at a huge loss, and no school would want to do that. So you really have to set yourself apart from the main body of students in some way, and that's most easily done with your GPA and LSAT score. But if you don't already have your LSAT score, all I can recommend is that you really work hard on prepping that score. It's one of the best things that you can do to increase your chances of not only getting into the school, but also getting a generous aid package. That's because your LSAT is one of the few things in a law app that's compared very directly to other students. Everyone takes the same type of test. Everyone takes the same LSAT. Or maybe not the same exact LSAT, but LSATs are pretty consistent when it comes to scoring across the many decades that they've been used. So you really want to put a lot of effort into studying for that test and getting your score up as high as you possibly can, within reason, of course. Don't spend 80 hours a week doing LSAT prep if you have other obligations, because it is just a test after all. But if you can throw in a few extra hours per week working on your LSAT score, that can really pay off in big ways when it comes time to actually apply for an aid package or applying for a school in general. That's something that worked really well for me. I actually started out getting a 148 on my LSAT. The first one I took, it was a practice test, and that's actually below average. The average is about a 150 to a 151. But through a ton of prep, and I took maybe 20 to 25 tests, I was able to raise my score up to a 163 when I actually took the real test, which is above average. And that put me in a comfortable spot when it came time to apply for the schools that I did eventually end up applying for. Had I stopped my prep when I was in the mid 150s, I might have struggled to actually get the aid package that I eventually did get, even though I'm largely the same person as before, which is a little bit silly when it comes down to it, which shows you the importance of making sure that you do well on that test. So the more prep that you can do when it comes to prepping for the LSAT, the better, because the higher score, the higher chances of being above average compared to the average applicant at a school. I'll include a link to some LSAT test prep books that I use. Basically, I think the best way to prep for the LSAT is to take real practice tests. You can take a course. I never took a course, and I was able to improve my score by 15 points. So if I can do it, certainly someone else can, and you could probably do better than I did. But either way, I think the best way to do it is to take tests that were actually former LSATs, since the LSAT largely has not changed, and you can use those to really test your progress, test certain sections, and really do that. So I'll include a link to those books in the description, and that's an Amazon affiliate link, so I might get a small commission if you end up buying something, but it's of no extra cost to you. The third thing that you need are some good letters of recommendation. I'd recommend casting a wide net here and trying to get letters of rec from as many people that you think would write good ones as you possibly can. Now, when you get a letter of rec, you probably won't actually get to see it because you'll waive your right to see it. Now, a teacher might still end up showing it to you anyways because they like you, in which case, great. That means it's probably a really good letter of rec for you. But technically, you're not supposed to see it if you say that you're waiving your right to see it. And the best way to do this if you're still in school is to make good relationships with your teachers. Or if you are out of school and are thinking about applying to law school, try to maintain relationships with teachers who you had classes with, or maybe that you did research projects with. Those are your best points of contact and your best resources for actually getting a good letter of rec that'll help you the most on your application. Typically, you would want someone who could speak to your writing abilities or your research abilities and that sort of thing. But also, if you have a professional reference who can talk about how you are in the workplace, maybe your leadership abilities, that's great as well. Anything to make you not only look good just as a student, but also as a leader as well. Because if you're trying to stand above the average applicant, the more you can look like an individual leader, the better. So on my application, I had a handful of professors, and I also had my former boss at an internship I was at that I had a really good relationship with. So I think I had some pretty good letters of rec, and it looked like it paid off when I ended up applying to school. And you don't have to get them in the months prior to your application. You can get them well in advance. I got my first one a full year before I actually had to turn anything in, and I got a couple closer to the deadline. So it's not as though there's some window that you have to get your letter of rec in. If you have a good relationship with someone now, you might as well get that letter of rec sooner rather than later, and if you really want to revise it later, you can ask them to. But if you have something good going now and you don't think it's going to get much better before you actually have to apply, you might as well lock in that letter of rec sooner rather than later. So once you have those letters of rec ready to go, the last thing you're going to need is a solid personal statement, and I mean very solid. Your personal statement probably isn't going to be what really is the bulk of your application consideration. That's probably going to be mostly your LSAT and your transcript, but your personal statement can certainly hurt you a lot if you don't do well on it. If you have a great LSAT score and a great GPA, but your personal statement is filled with typos, you're probably going to get knocked down the list quite a bit because you're showing that you're not putting a lot of care into this personal statement, which is the only real thing that they're going to read in addition to your resume as well. I should have included that on this list as well. You're going to need a tailored resume as well. But the personal statement is your chance to show your writing abilities a bit, maybe some creativity ideally, so that it's not just some cliched essay, but at least make sure it's polished, because if it's not polished, you're going to be only shooting yourself in the foot since you're turning in basically a bad essay. I've actually included a link to my own personal statement that I used that you can take a look at, maybe use it for inspiration. Within that article that I have down there, it actually links to an article from the University of Chicago, which posts some successful essays of its students. It's best to get some inspiration because you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to making your personal statement. And you can do a lot of things with it. You can talk about a particular experience, you can talk about something that you learned, and generally you just want to tell a good story in a clean and concise way. And while you're telling that story, you're telling a little bit about yourself and showing your ability as a writer as well. But either way, you definitely want to have some more people read that personal statement, ideally someone who might be completely unfamiliar with whatever it is you're talking about, since that might be the admissions person. If you're writing about a particular topic that might have some jargon involved that the normal person might not understand, make sure that you can sort of translate that into more concise and approachable language for someone who's completely unfamiliar with the topic and doesn't know you. So for example, with mine, I talked a lot about baseball, but I had to really be careful with using too much baseball slang because a person reading my application who's not familiar with baseball was going to be in a really weird place. But of course, I didn't want to take it all out because then it loses some of its personality. So it's kind of a balancing act depending on what you're talking about. You can take a look at my article for examples. So once you have these 4 things ready to go, you should have a pretty solid app. And now it's time to pick schools to apply to. If you have a region that you want to apply to as many of those schools within that region as possible. Ideally, you're going to want to have multiple offers from multiple schools to leverage against each other. In my case, I applied to all of the Chicago schools. Since I knew I wanted to stay in Chicago, that's where I was planning on getting married, and I eventually did get married, so that all worked out. But that's where I was looking to apply. So I applied to every single Chicago school and expected to use whatever offers I got against each other, basically, and hopefully someone would want me enough to throw me some money. But my target school was not the University of Chicago or Northwestern, which are the elite schools of the region. I instead wanted to target one of the mid-tier schools, like Chicago-Kent, where I'm at now. That was actually my target school, because I knew that I was above average when it came to admissions numbers, and I had a good shot of getting some good aid packages because I knew that Chicago-Kent offers full rides. Not every law school will offer full rides, so be careful of that. A lot of them may cap their aid package at something like 2/3 or something like that. So be aware of that. You're not going to be able to get a full ride from every single school, but a lot of them do offer them to a select number of students each year. And you never know what school you're going to get into, so it's best to really take a broad approach in making sure that you get at least one offer if you're really serious in going to law school and you really want to get at least one offer. In my case, I got some really good aid packages off the bat from some of the schools that were lower on my list and were lower in rankings. And I knew that was going to be great when it came time to ask for Chicago-Kent to raise my scholarship amount. Basically, every law school is going to give you some base level of scholarship. No one really pays sticker price at your mid-tier school. Everyone gets some sort of scholarship, but whether you get the full ride scholarship is definitely a different story. But because my application stood out ahead of the average, I knew I had a really good shot. And when I finally had another full ride offer from a different school that, although it was lower in ranking, it was in the same region and it could be used as some sort of leverage, I let Chicago-Kent know about that. I let all of the schools that I applied to know about it, that, hey, I have this full ride offer. I'm heavily considering it. What do you got for me? Now, I worded it a lot more nicely than that, but that's generally what you want to do. You want to show other schools, hey, I have this really nice offer over here. Can you match it or can you come up a little bit? It doesn't hurt to ask. Obviously, do it politely, because then that'll hurt you if you're impolite, but ask to see if the school is willing to give you more money. Or is able to remove a condition on your scholarship or something like that. Realize that you have negotiating power. It might not be a ton, but the higher you up are on that sort of admissions totem pole, the more attractive of a student you are in your application, the more negotiating power you're going to have. But really, the whole thing is very similar to finances. You want to live below your means. You don't want to go for the top tier school unless, I guess, if you really, really can't live without it, because you can get some really good financial packages from a school that is below your means. And that's a great thing, because not only can I graduate from law school completely debt-free now, I have a lot more flexibility in taking career opportunities that I want to go for, or maybe even taking some more risk because I don't have that massive student debt burden that comes with a full-price law school. Just realize that you have other options out there. If you were really dead set on one school, consider some others and see, well, if I paid full price to the school I really want to go to compared to maybe a lesser school that would give me a full ride, it's not that difficult to see how that full ride can really pay off very quickly because you don't have that giant student debt burden. But getting a full ride to law school is definitely obtainable and just takes some effort and really some careful planning to make sure that you're applying to schools that are within your means and ideally are technically below them. I hate to say it that way, but as long as your application looks stronger than their average applicant, you have a really good shot at getting a good aid package. Well, anyways, that's all I've got for today. If you like this video, please give it a like as it helps the channel out a lot. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates regarding any of my personal finance videos or anything like that. And definitely leave a comment below if you have any questions about my law school process or really anything about personal finance in general, although I'm not a financial advisor, so just keep that in mind. Nothing I say is financial advice, nothing is legal advice either. I'm just a law student and a guy on YouTube. But anyways, until next time, take care.